In this video, we're going to identify if a function is linear, exponential, or quadratic by simply taking a look at its graph. So far in algebra class, we've covered 3 different types of graphs pretty in-depthly. And the 3 types that we've covered are linear, exponential, and quadratic. And they all have a very, very distinct shape to them. So if you take a look at linear, hopefully what most of you are recognizing is that linear contains the word line. And that's because every time we see a straight line graph with 2 arrows on each side, what we really have when we have a straight line with an arrow on each side, regardless of what that line looks like, it's a linear function. And it's formed by the same type of general equation. So anytime we see a straight line with an arrow on each side, we have what's called a linear function. Now the second graph that we've been exposed to this year is called an exponential function. And that was typically what I called our swoosh graph. That's not really what the shape is called, but it looks kind of like a Nike swoosh. So an example of what this looks like is it literally looks kind of like a swoosh. Now my graph isn't great there, it's a little wonky looking, but you can see that it has that general swoosh shape to it. And what happens is one end grows up or down very, very quickly, while the other end actually gets very, very close to that x-axis. So you can see here in all of these, we either have something that's shooting up on one side or down on one side, and then the other side is getting very close to the x-axis. That was called our exponential function. So anytime we saw this swoosh shape, we had an exponential function. And then the last graph type that we studied is called the quadratic, and that was when we had our parabola shape. So we had those U's, they had arrows on each side, and they could be all over the graph. So these are just a couple of examples of what quadratic graphs looked like. So they were all in the shape of a parabola, which means they all had that general U-looking shape that was symmetrical on both sides. So here we have a couple of examples of sets of data. You can see here we have some points, here we have some points, and here we have some points. And what we're going to do is we're going to figure out what type of function we have that is being formed by those points. So all we're going to do for each example is we're going to plot the points on our coordinate plane, and then we're going to look at that shape and we're going to identify, is it linear? Is it exponential? There's another N in there, exponential, or is it quadratic? So we're going to take a look at each one and we're going to decide which shape we have. So if I start plotting the points for this first one, we have x is -4, y is 1, x is -2, y is 2, x is 0, y is 3, x is 2, y is 4, x is 4, y is 5. And if I take a look at that, if I were to connect the dots, this looks like a very straight line. And as a result, because I have a straight line, I know that I have a linear function here that is being modeled by these points. Then if I take a look at that second one, so we have x is -4, y is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. X is -2, y is 2, x is 0, y is 1, x is 2, y is 2, x is 4, y is 5. And what I see here is I see something that looks kind of like a U. So if I start to kind of sketch out and connect those points, I notice that these look like they're forming a U shape. And if we're forming a U shape, we have what's called a quadratic, because that is our parabola graph. And then lastly, if we plot these points, we have -4, 132. That's going to be a super tiny point down there. -2, 1/8, 0, 1/2, 2, 2, then we got 4, 8. So this one doesn't look like a line and doesn't look like a U. If I start to connect the dots, it kind of looks like that swoosh graph that we saw. And as a result, because I see that swoosh graph, I know here that I have an exponential function. So we can tell, if we have a set of points, we can tell what type of function we have by simply plotting those points and looking at the shape. A linear graph will produce a line. A quadratic graph will produce a U, which is our parabola shape. And our exponential graph will produce a swoosh graph.